Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the last Cooking with Plants class for 2025. If you haven't been with us before, I'm Kelly Wilson, and I am a registered dietitian with our lifestyle medicine department. I'm based in Southeast Michigan, but this program is for anybody, anywhere. If you aren't familiar with what lifestyle medicine is, if that's new to you, it is a medical specialty that focuses on disease treatment, reversal, and prevention through 6 key pillars. We talk to folks about social connection, getting restorative sleep, moving their body on a regular basis, eating nourishing whole plant foods, which is what we talk about in class tonight and in all of our previous classes this year. And then finally, avoiding risky substances. So our team uses these 6 pillars and helps folks develop the skills in each of those areas so that they can take charge of their health and well-being, treat and prevent, and in some cases, reverse chronic illness. Tonight's class, like I said, is focusing on that plant-based whole food nutrition pillar. And if you haven't participated in this class series, if this is your first one, first of all, welcome. Second of all, I encourage you to look back at some of the videos from previous months. You'll get the links in the class follow-up email. We cover a lot of ground in this class, and my whole goal with this series really is to make eating these plant foods that we know benefit our health and well-being really easy. So our recipes are easy to follow. They don't use super fancy ingredients. They're affordable and they're fast. Because I love cooking, but I don't love spending time in my kitchen, especially the cleanup part. So my goal with all of the recipes in this program are to make it easy for you to get those foods on your plate quickly. I also firmly believe that anybody can cook. You don't have to have advanced training to make nourishing, delicious food. And the recipes that I share in this class or recipes that you see in other blogs online or cookbooks are always suggestions. So make sure that you're kind of following the general format, but adapt those recipes based on your taste preferences and the ingredients that you have on hand. It's totally fine. And if you're new to eating some of these plant foods that we might talk about in tonight's class, or you'll see in some of the videos from earlier in the year, remember that any big change that we're trying to make in our life starts with small steps. So focus on one thing at a time, change one small habit at a time, and that will build up to sustainable long-term success. Okay, slow and steady wins the race. And celebrate anytime that you do make a positive change, because when we reward ourselves with that good positive energy, it actually changes our brain and it gives us more motivation to continue that habit. So some couple housekeeping tech things. If you want closed captions for this program, if you go to there's 3 little dots at the top of the toolbar. It says more underneath of it. If you hover over that, it opens up a drop-down menu. Click on language, and then you can turn on live captions from there. If you want to ask a question, please do. I really appreciate how interactive you are and the fact that you do ask really good questions. Use the Q&A function. Again, it's in that top toolbar. It's the 2 overlapping bubbles, with one with a question mark in it. Type questions there. It is there's a little time delay, so please be patient with me because it might take a minute or 2 before I see that question in the chat, but I promise I will look at that. And please try to keep those questions relevant to the group and to the topic. If you have a specific question related to your health conditions or something that feels maybe more personal, feel free to email us, lifestylemedicine@trinity-health.org, and I'll make sure that you get a response to that question. And if I don't know the answer, I'll connect you with somebody who does. If you are a Trinity Health colleague and you're joining tonight, know that you get points towards keeping your insurance premium low just by participating in this class. You get 250 points. So to get those after you finish watching this class, whether you're watching the recording or you're joining us here live, email lifestylemedicine@trinity-health.org, and I'll get you the code to enter for those points. And just a note, you can get 250 points for any of the classes you watch. So if you go back and you watch recordings from June, or you go all the way back to February, as many classes as you watch, you get those 250 points for every class. So just email me the classes that you watch. As always, our class content focuses on general health information. Most people can benefit from eating the plant foods that we talk about in this series. However, some health conditions require a little bit more nuance. So if you have a health condition you've been newly diagnosed with and you haven't worked with a dietitian or talked to your physician about some of the nutrition and medication changes you need to make, do that first, and then consider making some of these swaps that we talk about in class based on their recommendations. Okay, tonight, what are we doing tonight? We are focused on baking because it's the holiday season, and I'm sure, like many of you, this is a time of year when I have very fond memories of baking holiday cookies with family. And if I'm choosing to eat plant-based, there are some ingredients in a lot of my favorite baked goods that I might want to swap out. So tonight we're going to talk about how you might adapt some of your favorite baked good recipes to include some plant-forward ingredients. So increase the health factor of them without decreasing the enjoyment. We are going to focus on making a muffin, a couple different types of cookies, and then we are going to make a coffee cake as well. So a lot of ground to cover, but I promise we will get through it. So let's get into some science. This is really important. Baking is a science, and it's really important that we understand some of the properties and functions of the common ingredients used in our recipes, so that as we're thinking about swaps that we might want to make for food allergy reasons or health reasons, whatever it might be, we can consider an alternative that has similar properties. Okay, so we're going to start talking about fat. Fat is typically used in a baking recipe to lend flavor because many of the flavor compounds, or the compounds that we're tasting on our tongue, are fat soluble. And so we need some fat to help disperse that flavor throughout the dish. Fat also is really important for supporting leavening, which is basically air incorporation into a baked good. And that air incorporation is really important for making sure we don't have like a hockey puck of a muffin, that we have a nice fluffy muffin that kind of pulls apart, is a little bit airier. Also super important for cakes, cookies, all of our other baked goods. An example of how fat might be used to add leavening. A lot of recipes, especially like cookie recipes, will talk about creaming butter, like softened butter, with your sugar. And you do that step because it creates kind of a web that then has all of these little air pockets in it, and that adds some of that lightness and fluffiness to the baked goods. That's also really important for texture. It coats, so like the fat particles coat flour, which prevents too much gluten from forming. And gluten if we develop too much gluten, it can make our baked goods really tough. So the fat helps kind of tenderize and prevent that flour from developing too much gluten. That also is really important for contributing moisture. Similarly, the fat particles, again, they're coating the flour, and so that flour can't absorb as much moisture, and the other wet ingredients in the baked good are then able to contribute steam to that product and add to a nice, moist, and tender crumb. So that's fat. Another very common ingredient used in our baked goods is our eggs, and we'll talk through some alternatives if you're choosing not to eat eggs. Moisture is a big reason why we use them. An egg white is where most of the moisture in an egg is, and that egg white is almost 80% water. Leavening, again, so helping to incorporate more air. Think about when you if you've ever whipped an egg white, or when you're like, if you scrambled eggs, it gets kind of frothy. The protein matrix in the egg and the egg white is helping to kind of trap those air bubbles, and then those air bubbles get incorporated into your dish. Eggs are really important for binding. The protein in eggs is a significant source of structure to a lot of our baked goods. And that binding also helps with thickening. You can think of like custard recipes, or recipes that kind of have that element to them. And then eggs are also really important for emulsification, which is mixing a water and an oil. Typically things that are literally polar opposites and do not combine. Eggs and the yolk have a compound called lecithin, which helps oil and water blend together. So it helps to create a creamier texture and consistency. Milk. Dairy milk is something that's commonly used. We're going to use some alternatives here tonight, and no surprise, we're using that to add some moisture. We are also sometimes using that to add leavening. So things like buttermilk in particular. Buttermilk is a source of acid. Many recipes contain things like baking powder or baking soda that when you introduce an acid, it forms air bubbles, and that creates some of that leavening and that lightness in the dish. Dairy products also, they contain protein, they contain lactose, which is a milk sugar. And when we heat a protein and sugar, that forms this reaction called the Maillard reaction. We see that as browning. And that browning kind of adds some deeper, richer flavor, so kind of some caramel or molassesy notes, and contributes visually to the dish as well. So if we're thinking of plant-forward cooking and we're choosing to not eat animal products for health or ethical reasons, there are many different options that we can swap in. So we're going to talk about what some of those are. And before we get into the fat swaps, I do want to make it abundantly clear that fat is totally okay to consume. You don't need to cut it out of your life. And especially when we're baking, baked goods they're treats. They're not things that we're eating all of the time. So a little bit of fat in these products is not going to derail your health and well-being. So just, keep that in mind. Don't want to scare you off the fat. If you have cardiovascular disease, or you're trying to reduce your saturated fat intake, butter is a source of saturated fat that's commonly used in a lot of baked goods. So is like the plant-based palm shortening that you might see in the grocery store also is a source of saturated fat. We want to avoid saturated fat as much as possible, because that is the type of fat that is strongly connected to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, dementia, and all sorts of other chronic health conditions. So if we're trying to reduce our saturated fat intake, the swaps that you see here on the screen can be really great. So fruit purees like applesauce, unsweetened applesauce, pumpkin puree, and mashed banana all work really well. They add the moisture and the tenderization elements that fat typically has. However, we're going to get a little less leavening from them. So you want to maybe add some more baking soda, baking powder, cream of tartar, to depending on which of those baking soda, baking powder you're using, to help increase more leavening and air in the product. Or you could use something like an aquafaba, which we'll talk about later, whipped to help incorporate some more air. Banana does have a distinct flavor. The pumpkin has a distinct flavor too. So if you're going to substitute with those, think about if those flavor profiles match the type of baked good that you're using. If you're trying to make something savory, those options might not be what you want to choose. Another really great fat substitute is a nut or seed butter. Again, these, depending on what one you're using, might have a distinct flavor, so keep that in mind when you're making your swaps. And these are a little bit heavier, so your final product is going to be denser. So you might want to reserve the nut butters for things like brownies, where that fudginess, that heaviness is welcomed. A lot of people really like that gooiness. And then finally, avocado, that is another great option. Some mashed avocado can go 1-to-1 in a lot of recipes for oil or butter. It does darken a baked good. So again, if you care about appearances, this might be a better option for a brownie, which is already dark and you're not going to notice that change. For eggs, I mentioned the word aquafaba, and we're going to use that tonight. And that is just a fancy word. It's aqua, water, faba, bean. It's bean water. And the bean water that we're using is from chickpeas. So we're going to use tonight water from canned chickpeas. And what is so cool about this magical byproduct of bean cooking is that it whips just like egg whites, and you can replace use a few tablespoons to replace one whole egg in a recipe, and it provides the moisture and the binding very much like an egg would. And the research is still out on what exactly is going on in the chickpea cooking water that contributes to those unique properties, but there is some thought that maybe it's connected to the saponins, and that's what gives the kind of like frothy, bubbly, egg-like structure to that bean water. Some folks have had success using other types of bean cooking liquid, but I would suggest if you're new to exploring egg alternatives, start with the chickpea brine. That is the most consistently successful. So you use that, and then you have after you've drained that off and used your aquafaba in your recipe, you have chickpeas that you can incorporate maybe into the chickpea salad that we made in one of our other classes. Another egg substitute option is ground flaxseed. You want to make sure the flaxseed is ground because you need it to absorb the water. You mix 1 tablespoon of flaxseed with 1.5 tablespoons of water to replace 1 egg. And then you let it sit for about 5 minutes so that the flaxseed starts to absorb some of the water. And we're going to use that tonight, and I'll show you what that looks like, and you'll see why it is used as an egg substitute in baking. You wouldn't want to cook you wouldn't want to cook the ground flaxseed for like an omelet style thing. Chia seeds can be used very similar to the ground flaxseed. 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed, 1.5 tablespoons of water for 1 egg. And then finally, you can also use silken tofu. This works well for bakes that are dense. So think about like those brownies again, or if you want to make a cheesecake or a plant-forward kind of custard dish, silken tofu can be really great substitute in that. And if you go to the Cooking with Plants recipe page from last month when we did celebration meals, there's a recipe on there for a silken tofu pie, which is like a chocolate cheesecake. It's delicious. If you're baking with it, 1/4 cup of silken tofu is going to be about 1 egg. All right, and finally, dairy milk. The easiest thing that you can do in a recipe that calls for dairy milk is to swap in some unsweetened non-dairy milk, 1 for 1, rice milk, almond milk, soy milk, oat milk, whatever is your fancy. Just again, consider the flavor. Soy milk is going to be a better option. It's a little bit more neutral. So it's broader application, and that's going to be a better option for savory bakes as well. If you choose oat milk, keep in mind that it does have some natural sweetness. So you might want to reduce some of the other sweet elements in the baked good. And because it has that higher natural sugar content, the bakes that you make might brown a little bit faster. So don't be alarmed if they come out a little bit darker. If you have a recipe that calls for buttermilk, you can make your own buttermilk with a non-dairy milk. So 1 cup of whatever non-dairy milk your heart desires with a tablespoon of either lemon juice or vinegar. Let that sit for about 5 minutes, and then you have your buttermilk ready to go in your recipe. Okay, now that all of that is fresh in our mind, we are going to stop looking at slides. We're going to head into the kitchen, and I'm going to make sure everything is spotlighted so everybody can see. If anybody's having trouble seeing the bowl and the spatula view and me in the kitchen, drop that in the Q&A function, because I want to make sure everybody can see everything. So I said we're going to do 4 recipes. We're going to start with our muffin recipe. And as we make each of these recipes, I want you to pay attention to the consistency of the batter. I think that's a really helpful tool to, especially as you're making swaps. It's a good clue to see if you kind of got your mix right. So pay attention to kind of what the consistency of what a muffin batter looks like. We're going to do 2 cookies so you can see that, and then that coffee cake quick bread. Looks like I've got a question. So bear with me 1 second as that pulls up. Oh, okay. I've got egg substitute in a pancake mix. Colin, that's a great question. So you could use the flaxseed egg or the aquafaba. The aquafaba is gonna not really add any flavor. The flaxseed, and I should have mentioned this when we were talking about it earlier, but the flaxseed does add a little bit of a nutty flavor and a little bit of a texture. So if you don't want any textural differences in your pancakes, go with that aquafaba. If you don't care and you want a little bit more fiber and omega-3 fatty acids, use those ground flax seeds. That was a great question. And yeah, please feel free to keep dropping questions in the chat. All right, we're going to move on to our muffin recipe. So I've got a bowl here. This is a 1 bowl Morning Glory muffin. We're going to start with our flaxseed. I've got 4 here. So if you look here in this small bowl, I've got 1.5 tablespoons, or how much today? Yeah, 1.5 tablespoons of ground flax and 4 tablespoons of water. And so you can see how it's kind of goopy, and it looks like the consistency of egg white. So that's going into my bowl here. And then I've got a 1/4 cup of unsweetened sunflower butter. You could use peanut butter, almond butter. You could do tahini, which is sesame seed butter, if you wanted to. So that's going in here. And remember, this is replacing the fat. So in place of like a canola oil, we're using that 1/4 cup of unsweetened sun butter. I've got a 1/3 cup of mashed banana. That was about 1 medium banana, ripe, and that was mashed. And that is adding, it's supporting some of the same goals that like fat might. It's adding some moisture. It's also helping with some of the, which is what the egg would do as well. So we're getting some moisture from the banana in place of the egg. And then it's also adding some sweetness without adding added sugar. For our added sugar, we're using maple syrup, and we're using the maple syrup for the liquid component. And I really like that kind of darker molasses-y flavor. So we're going with the maple syrup. I've got 1/2 cup of unsweetened applesauce. Again, more moisture, more sweetness without having to add more added sugar. And I've got a teaspoon of cinnamon a half teaspoon of salt, and a half teaspoon of baking soda. And I'm just gonna mix those together before we go to our other ingredients. Okay. And then I've got 2/3 cup of rolled oats. So it's a whole grain. And then I've got 1.5 cups of, I'm using a gluten-free flour. You could use an all-purpose flour here. You could use a whole wheat flour or a spelt flour. A whole wheat flour is going to make this a little bit denser, but I really like the kind of nuttiness that adds to this dish. I think it pairs well with the fruit and the sweetness of the maple syrup. Okay, and then we have 1 cup of shredded carrots, a half cup of, I'm using soy milk in this because I felt like I was getting enough sweetness from the other ingredients. And if I didn't say this when we were talking about the non-dairy milks, make sure you're always choosing unsweetened, whatever application you're going for, but especially for baking, because there are a lot of already sweet ingredients in our baked goods. Okay, our final ingredient here, after I get this flour all incorporated, is a 1/4 cup of chopped nuts. I'm using pecans. You could use walnuts, you could use slivered almonds, whatever works for you. I grabbed pecans. I like their sweetness, and they were on sale at the grocery store this week. So that's what we're using. Now that that's all mixed, here's what that batter looks like. See how it's kind of sticky, right? So that's what a muffin batter should look like. So keep that in mind as you're kind of experimenting with your own muffin recipes. You want it to be like wet and sticky, but not runny. We got our muffin tray here. Take this, please. We're gonna put, I've got a scoop. So this is a 1/4 cup scoop. I really love these kind of scoops for cookies. This is too big for cookies. I'll show you the other one I'm going to use for cookies, but this makes portioning out doughs really easy. So for the muffins, I'm going to 1 scoop full for each muffin cup. So about a 1/4 cup. If you don't have a scoop like this, you don't want to invest in another piece of kitchen equipment, a 1/4 cup measuring cup works just fine. You don't have to buy anything fancy. I just really like this button because it helps get the batter out of the scoop really easily. So while we were mixing this batter, we should have preheated our oven to 375 degrees, and we are going to bake these in that oven, that 375 degree oven, for about 35 minutes until the tops are nice and brown. And when we press down on the tops, they aren't squishy. Okay. All right, so that's what our muffin tin looks like before it goes into the oven. After it goes into the oven, 40 minutes later, it comes out and looks like this, right? So we've got our nice brown muffins in our muffin cups. Take it out. It's got that nice moist crumb. Okay, and it smells like carrot cake. So if you're a carrot cake fan, this is a muffin recipe for you. Okay, recipe number 2. I think we're gonna do our carrot cake or our coffee cake. So this is a pumpkin coffee cake, and it's inspired by a recipe I found on Real Food RDs. We are gonna start with making can you get me a cereal bowl out of there, please? We're gonna start by making a swirl. It's like a date paste and cinnamon filling that's gonna go in the center our coffee cake. So we have a 1/3 cup of date paste. So to make the date paste, I boiled water and I soaked, I think I ended up soaking 8 medjool dates. You could use any kind of pitted date you want to. The medjool dates are just a little bit bigger. So if you use like a neglet date, then you just may need to use more of them. I soaked them in hot water for 10 minutes and then I took them out of the water, put them in a bowl and used my immersion blender with a couple tablespoons of the liquid that I soaked them in to blend them into this paste. So I got that 1/3 cup in here, and we're using this as an alternative to brown sugar because this date paste, you could use brown sugar here too. Again, these kinds of recipes are occasional things. They're things that we're eating as treats. We're not eating them all the time. But I wanted to give you an option to reduce some of the added sugar if you wanted to choose that. And the nice thing about the dates too is that they're adding a little bit more fiber. I also just really like the flavor of them because they're kind of like in that caramely. I think I'm really big into the caramel molasses, I guess, right now. So you get that from the date paste without having to work too hard for it. So 1/3 cup of date paste. We've got 2 teaspoons of ground cinnamon. That warming spice. It adds a lot of sweet sensation without, again, having to add more added sugar. I've got 2 tablespoons of avocado oil. We're using that because it's neutral in flavor, and that oil is helping kind of mix all of this together. If you are oil-free for cardiovascular health reasons or other reasons, you could use a tablespoon or 2 of water here just to kind of thin this out. And then we have a, oops, nope, that's for our next part. We're gonna mix this together and then I'm gonna add in some nuts. So again, the avocado oil, cinnamon, and my date paste. And then this is gonna make a nice little filling in between some of the layers of the coffee cake. Lily, this is a little thick. Could you get me a little bit of water in that, please? Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, so that's our swirl. And then we've got a 1/3 cup of pecans that we're going to add in here. And so again, this is a filling. So this is going to be a nice little crunch and texture in the middle of our coffee cake. So these are chopped pecans. I'm just breaking up some of the bigger pieces. Again, you could use any nut that you wanted to here. This filling that we're making right here would also be really good in cinnamon rolls. So if that's something that you enjoy making, this is basically that same kind of filling that you would put in a dish like that. All right, these are going in. Stir those around, and we're going to set this aside and come back to it once we get our batter prepared. Okay, thank you, Lily. All right, so for our batter, we are going to start with 1.5 cups of flour. Again, the flour is white because I'm using a gluten-free flour, but that doesn't have to be what you use here. I just happen to be gluten-free, so that's what I'm using. You could use a whole wheat flour. Again, that's going to be a little bit denser, or you could use a spelt flour or an all-purpose flour here. And then I've got 1 teaspoon of baking powder. I have a teaspoon of pumpkin pie spice. If you don't have pumpkin pie spice, you could substitute cinnamon here, maybe with a touch of ginger, and if you have some allspice, throw a little bit of allspice in there. And then there was also a 1/4 teaspoon of salt in that. And I am gonna mix this together. So these are our dry ingredients, nice and combined. Just going until I see that cinnamon is somewhat evenly dispersed throughout the dish. Looks pretty good. And now we're going to mix our wet ingredients together. So I've got 3/4 cup of pumpkin. That is adding it's adding some flavor, it's adding some texture, it's adding some moisture. We're also using it in this recipe in place of fat. And I've got a 1/2 cup of sugar for sweetness. I am going to mix the pumpkin and the sugar together. That sugar is also contributing texture to this dish. And just like you can cream butter and sugar together, you can do that same thing with the pumpkin and reap some of those leavening, so that air incorporation properties. All right, so we got that mixed together. We're adding 1/2 cup of that soy milk. Again, you use whatever unsweetened non-dairy milk you prefer. I've got 2 flax eggs right here. You could use the aquafaba here. Again, if you don't like the nuttiness that the flax provides, I personally, my taste buds enjoy having a little bit of nuttiness to counteract some of the sweetness. And I think especially with already having pecans in this dish, it works really well. But if you don't have flax seeds or you don't love that flavor, try the aquafaba. It'll work just as well. All right, and then finally, I've got 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla. So now we are going to mix our wet ingredients into our dry ingredients. And then we are going to put them into a 9-inch pan. You can use a rectangular pan if you would like. We're going to use a round pan tonight because that is what I have. Just depends on what shape you would like to serve your coffee cake in. We're just going to mix this until all of the flour, whoops. Well, it's not baking if you're not flinging flour everywhere. At least in my house. I feel like every time I make cookies or a baked good, there's usually flour in a few places that I didn't expect. All right, so I'm just kind of trying to scrape the sides of the bowl as I go to make sure that none of the flour is sticking and get in the crevices of the bowl here. Okay. Most of that flour is almost all incorporated. Because this coffee cake is really similar to a quick bread, unless like a traditional like sponge cake, the batter is really similar to our muffins. It's a little, I'd say it's a little more runnier than our muffins, but it's really similar. So we are going to take half of this batter and we are going to put it in the bottom of our pan here and just try to spread it out as evenly as possible. Crust this, and because it's kind of sticky, it's a little hard, but you don't have to worry about being too perfect with it. Just do as best you can so that we're just trying to spread it out evenly so that it cooks evenly. Okay, so we've got layer 1 down, and now we are going to add our swirl. I added a couple tablespoons of water here because my date paste was really thick. Okay, and now I'm going to take that date paste and I'm just going to try to put it around fairly evenly. It's gonna move when we put the next layer of batter on top. So again, doesn't have to be perfect here, but just trying to get all the yumminess dispersed evenly so all of your friends get equal joy from eating this. Okay, I think that's as good as I'm gonna get with a fork scraping that bowl. All right, and now the last layer of batter. This step is a little bit harder to it's a little bit harder to spread because of the layer of date paste, that cinnamon swirl middle layer. So I find it helps a little bit if you try to kind of put dollops of the dough or the batter around, so you're not trying to spread a big glob from the center. It's a little bit easier just to spread smaller dollops. Okay, so just trying to get this evenly spread. Almost all of it here. I don't see any questions, but please feel welcome to drop those in the chat if you have any. Also, be curious if you have any swaps or favorite plant-based baked goods that you and your family enjoy making. Please feel welcome to share those. I think that's a fun thing. We can do a virtual cookie swap. You can share your favorite recipes. Okay, almost there. Just kind of trying to spread this out fairly evenly. If some of that filling kind of peeks out from underneath that layer and works its way to the edges, that's okay. It's just going to add a little bit of color, and it's still going to taste delicious. So don't worry too much about it. All right, to finish it off, we're going to sprinkle with, we've got about 1/4 cup of chopped pecans. Those are just going to go on top. I'm throwing pecans just like I was throwing the flour. So we're going to have some cleanup later. Okay, so there you go. There is your coffee cake before it is cooked. And then you put it into a 350-degree oven for 50 minutes. And you let it cool. You slice it into pieces like this, and you can garnish it with some more chopped pecans, a little dusting of confectioner's sugar or powdered sugar. You could make some more of that date paste and put a dollop of date paste on top of here. Or maybe you make some coconut whipped cream, or you beat some aquafaba with a little bit of sugar and put that on top as well. This is really delicious, and it is coffee cake. And as named, it is very good with a cup of coffee or tea. I think the bitterness in the tea and coffee pair really well with the sweetness in that bake. I see a question came through. Oh, very good question, Becky. Becky asked if you use maple syrup as your sweetener. And Becky, I'm assuming you're replacing where it says like white sugar or brown sugar with the maple syrup. Then yes, you do need to reduce your other liquids. So that's a great question and smart thinking. All right, we have 2 cookie recipes to get through, so let's move on to those. Our very first cookie recipe that we're going to do is a chocolate chip cookie, and we're starting with 1 cup of oat flour. Now, if your grocery store doesn't have oat flour, but you have a bag of whole oats or rolled oats, excuse me, in your fridge or in your pantry, and you have a spice grinder or a coffee grinder, you could use that, which is exactly what I did. I used a little electric spice grinder to grind up flour until I had 1 cup. So 1 cup of oat flour, and then I have a 1/4 cup of all-purpose flour. So that is my first ingredient. This is a nice recipe because it's a 1-bowl recipe. For our fat, we are using a 1/2 cup of tahini. So tahini is sesame seed paste. It's 2 sesame seeds, what peanut butter is to peanuts. So same kind of thing. It is just ground sesame seeds. You could use an almond butter here if you have a sesame allergy or you can't find tahini in the grocery store. Often tahini is either in a Middle Eastern food section. You would definitely find it at a Middle Eastern grocery store. It might also be near where you find other nut butters. That's where it is in our grocery store. And we have 1/3 of a cup of maple syrup. I have got a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. It's going in here. And I have a 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. A 1/2 teaspoon of, excuse me, 1 teaspoon of vanilla. And then a 1/2 cup of dark chocolate chips. We're just gonna mix that together. And it's gonna seem really kind of soupy at first until that oat flour starts absorbing the liquid from the sesame seed paste and from the maple syrup. Depending on what type of tahini you can find and how runny it is, you might need to adjust this recipe by adding a little bit of water, a tablespoon or 2 at a time, or adding a little bit more oat or all-purpose flour, again, a couple tablespoons at a time, until you get a cookie batter that is sticky. You want it to be a little sticky, but not runny. Okay. We are going to use a cookie scoop to then portion this. So I have a 1.5 tablespoon cookie scoop. It gives you a little bit more than a dozen cookies if you use the 1.5 table scoop. If you use a 2 tablespoon cookie scoop, you will get exactly 12 cookies. We're just going to portion this out evenly. You don't have to press down on these cookies. They will spread nicely without having to do that. And what's fun about these, to me, is that the tahini is a little bit bitter. And so the sweetness from the chocolate and the sweetness from that maple syrup really play nicely with the tahini. And another fun thing about this recipe is that we're using a whole grain. So those rolled oats are a whole grain. So you're getting some whole grain here. And oats have a lot of soluble fiber in them. So they thicken and they bind really well. And we're not using eggs in this recipe, as you notice, or any of our traditional egg replacements that we were just talking about. So the oat and the tahini really help provide that same kind of structure that the eggs would. All right, so now we've got these. They go into a 400-degree oven for 15 minutes, and then we take them out. I should say 12 to 15 minutes. We take them out and they look just like this, right? So really delicious chocolate chip cookie. One more recipe to go. Our very last recipe of the year, which is hard to believe. We are going to make snickerdoodles. So this time of year, with the Christmas holiday, many people are doing Christmas cookie baking, and snickerdoodles are a really common one, at least in my family. It's one of my favorites, and so this is a take on a snickerdoodle cookie. We're going to use pumpkin, so it does have that flavor on it, so it's a little bit different than a traditional snickerdoodle, but no less delicious. All right, so we are going to start with our flour. We have got, oh, okay. No, you're good. You're good. I'm sorry. We have got, 1.25 cup of almond flour, and then 1.25 cup of our all-purpose flour. And I have 2 tablespoons of cornstarch, 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar. That cream of tartar is going to add that tang. If you have had snickerdoodle cookies before and you know there's a little kind of I don't want to say quite bite, but just like a little bit of a tang to them, that's that cream of tartar. So we're adding that. And then we also have some baking powder, 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking powder. And then I have 1 teaspoon of cinnamon and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. So we are going to mix our dry ingredients together. Again, until I see the flours are evenly incorporated. Another strategy that works really well to evenly incorporate flours and also to decrease lumps, like you can see some of these the flour is sticking together, is if you have a wire mesh strainer, you can pour everything through that wire mesh strainer and kind of sift it into your bowl. Okay. Do that. I'm gonna get another bowl for my wet ingredients. I have got a 1/2 cup of pumpkin. Again, this is serving as our fat. I have got 4 tablespoons of aquafaba. It's that chickpea brine. And I've got a teaspoon of vanilla and a 1/2 cup of sugar. We are going to whisk that together. Again, that's helping with that air incorporation, so we get a baked good that's not too dense. All right, and now I'm going to add my dry ingredients into my wet. And this is definitely going to be a drier dough, so keep that in mind. And actually, because it's now starting to stick together, I'm going to switch to my spatula. And I should have done that after I finished mixing the wet ingredients. So I would suggest when you're making this, use the whisk for your wet ingredients and then incorporate the wet and dry with the spatula, because as you continue to add the flour, all of your dough is just going to end up stuck inside your whisk, and that is less fun because you want the dough in your bowl so you can bake it and then eat it. Okay, so we are going to add the rest of this in here. Mix this. And this is gonna look like no way all of this flour is going to mix in, but I promise you it just takes a little bit of time and it will all incorporate. If you get to a point where you're like, oh, no way is this going to actually mix in, I need to add a little bit of water, that's okay. Like add a tablespoon at a time, add some water. Before you do that, I've also found it's helpful to use your hands to mix here to get all the dry ingredients incorporated. So I am actually going to start doing that. So obviously you want to make sure you have very clean hands if you're going to use them for this purpose. But I'm getting pretty close. Well, actually, you know what? The spatula is doing a good job. I don't need to use my hands. Okay. Again, I want to keep going until most of that, all that white is gone and it feels evenly incorporated. Okay, that feels pretty good to me. I think we are there. So now what I'm going to do is pinch off, and I can continue to mix as I do that. Okay, so all of that flour was incorporated. I knew you didn't believe me for a second that it was going to get incorporated. I didn't believe myself the very first time I made this. So we are going to make dough balls about an 1.5 inches. So I'm using about 1.5 tablespoons of dough, and we are going to do the quintessential snickerdoodle step of rolling them in some cinnamon sugar. So I have 1/4 cup of white sugar that I mixed a teaspoon of cinnamon in, and we are going to roll the ball in there, place it on our sheet tray, and repeat. Okay, we're going to do that until you have a dozen lining your sheet tray. And then you're going to take the back of a flat bottom of a cup or a measuring cup, and you're just going to gently press down. And you don't have to completely smash and flatten them, but until they look like this, okay? And they aren't going to change size from this. So if you want them to be a little bit bigger, just make your portions of dough a little bit bigger when you go to roll them into balls. So they go into the oven. They are baking at 350 for 12 minutes. And after that, they come out of the oven and they look just like this. So you have, they're obviously a little bit more orange in color than your typical snickerdoodle cookie, but they are just as delicious and a great addition to your holiday cookie exchange. All right, we did it. We got through all of our recipes. Thanks for hanging. We are going to go back to our slides real quick because I want to make sure you all have the information for next year's classes, and I have a quick survey that I want to share with everybody as well. So give me 1 second as I get our slides back up. And if you think of any questions, please drop those in the chat. Or again, if you have any favorite holiday baked goods that you like to make, I'd love to hear about those too. All right, so whether this is your first class or you have been here for all of our classes, I would love it if you would take a moment to complete our annual survey. It is short, it's anonymous, and there's an opportunity to win a cookbook at the end of it, a plant-based cookbook from our library. Taking this survey really helps me and our team as we're developing the class and the recipes for next year. And I really do listen to your feedback. We've adapted this class based on participant feedback every single year. So please either scan that QR code, or I'll drop a link in the chat that you can follow, and that will take you directly to the form. So if you can access the chat function, you should see that link in there. Oh, it looks like chat is turned off. Never mind. I will send it in the follow-up email. So if you are on your phone and you can't scan that QR code, look for the follow-up email. And then if you would like to take this class again next year, you are more than welcome. I would love to have you again. We're going to focus on some similar concepts, but our recipes are going to be different, and we're going to change up the format a little bit. So you will get exposure to new things, even if you participated in all of the classes this year. Again, that QR code, if you scan that, that'll take you to the registration page. It's still free, same time, same format of this virtual Teams meeting space, just some of the recipes and the content will be a little bit different. And please also feel welcome to share this class with any friends and family that you have. Anybody, anywhere is welcome to join this series, so please feel welcome to share it as you see fit. And then again, finally, a reminder, if you are a Trinity Health colleague, please email lifestylemedicine@trinity-health.org, and I'll make sure that you get those points towards keeping your insurance premium low. And I see Kathy, you have your hand up. If you want to drop your comment into the chat in the Q&A, that would be great, because unfortunately everyone is muted because we're recording the class. So please, I'll look for something in the Q&A.